أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. Welcome to another live English broadcast brought to you by the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement. Today, we are having another enlightening discussion on another aspect of Ahmadiyyat. In November 1985, the High Court of South Africa delivered a judgment to declare Ahmadis to be Muslims. This was a momentous occasion in the history of the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement. Today, almost 35 years later, we look back at the events which took place before, during, and after these legal proceedings. Joining us today are two panelists who have endless knowledge on the subject. Firstly, we have Dr. Zahid Aziz, President of the Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishati Islam United Kingdom. Dr. Aziz is a retired computational mathematics advisor from a UK university, and he has been the author and editor of several writings on Islam. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Also, we have the president of the Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishati Islam South Africa, Mr. Ibrahim Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed is a retired capital investment specialist for an oil company, and he is also a contributor of numerous articles on the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement. Welcome, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ibrahim Mohammed, the first question I have is for you. Can you tell us the prevailing circumstances which would have existed prior to the action being brought by the South Africa Jamaat?
Yes. Allow me to take you back maybe to the very beginning, where the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement first planted the seeds in South Africa, to get a better, broader context of how events evolved and unfolded over the years. Now we know, and everyone knows that's familiar with the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement, that our objective is to propagate Islam in the West, and we have been pioneers in that work. We have set up the first organized Muslim missions in Europe and in the UK. The Berlin Mosque, which is still there, is our flagship. And there was the Woking Mosque in England. Now, the Woking Mosque was headed by Khaja Kamaluddin, the Lahore missionary, who served under Maulana Muhammad Ali, who had established in 1914 the Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishati Islam Lahore as a breakaway from the Qadianis, doctrine we did not accept, that is on the continuation of prophethood. The Lahore Ahmadis believe that there's no prophet after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether new or old, and that's based on the teachings of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. Now, in South Africa in the 1920s, the community here came under very heavy attack from Christian missionaries, namely the Dutch Reformed Church. And the clerics really were not competent enough to deal with those attacks. Some prominent businessmen in our city who were very empathetic towards the cause of the local Muslim and the Muslim clerics, felt that something should be done about the situation. So what they did was they came to know about the Woking Mosque, which at that time had already been very prominent in the world somehow or other. There was a lot of communication about it, and Khaja Kamaluddin was already a very popular, known person in many parts of the world as this great missionary. And this is exactly what he was. They invited him to come to South Africa to assist them with the missionaries here. And that is what he did. He arrived in 1926, accompanied by Lord Hadley. And he was very, very popular in South Africa. In fact, if you allow me, I just want to read a tribute which the South African organizers and the community here wrote on behalf of him, for him. Sorry. This was published in several newspapers here, the Cape Argus, the Cape Times. It was also published in a Muslim newspaper called the Muslim Outlook. All of these are available in the archives. It was also published in our own magazine, the Islamic Review, in May 1926. On behalf of the Muslim community of South Africa, we, the undersigned, desire to extend to you a hearty welcome on this your first visit to South Africa. We are deeply conscious, as is the whole Muslim world, of the untiring energy and zeal with which you labored in the cause of Islam, especially as head of the Islamic mission at Woking, England. Your erudition and genial disposition, combined with a deep sense of modesty and sincerity of purpose, have contributed in no small measure to the spread of enlightenment concerning the fundamental truth of Islam in the West. Your lucid writings have indeed borne fruit, and it is our earnest prayer that Allah may bless you abundantly as you continue your labors in the noble cause. Happy indeed are we to bear testimony to the fact that as a worthy son of Islam, you have dedicated your life to the propagation of Islam to the West. May your ministrations continue with Allah's blessings to the productive of good. In conclusion, we express the hope that your sojourn in this land may be a happy one, and you will return to Woking with renewed energy to labor for the noble cause you have at heart. Now, these are very lofty words of praise, which deservedly Khaja Kamaluddin deserved, because this is the work that he did. And this is the mission of the Ahmadiyya Anjuman Islam. Now, Khaja Kamaluddin did not form a formal organization in 1926 in South Africa, but he left behind much literature, books, the Holy Quran, Mullah Muhammad Ali, Religion of Islam, and he had contacts which he had kept in touch with. And over several years, the quality and level and understanding of Islam was at the high pitch. And so was the Ahmadiyya movement that he represented. However, now around about 1940, going on to the 50s and the early 60s, Qadiani infiltration here led to certain fatwas being obtained from Al-Azhar, which declared that Ahmadis apparently were out of the pale of Islam. Now, this fatwa itself was very faulty and sketchy, and it came under scrutiny in the second case, during the Jassim case. And it was openly declared as being absolutely invalid and faulty, because the references made to Mirza Ghulam Ahmad there was not even from his writings. So we cannot really attach too much importance to the fatwa. But anyway, it exists. That is what they relied on. We also found that in that time, Dawood Saido started an organization linked to the Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishat Islam Lahore. And this was the first time the movement was formally established. He called it the Mediator Islamic Association, because he had started a newspaper, the very first Muslim registered newspaper in South Africa, called the Mediator. Dawood Saido was inspired by the works of Khaja Kamaluddin, whom he admired quite a lot. He read the Holy Quran by Mullah Muhammad Ali and literature left behind. And that was what inspired him to do and carry on the same work that he was doing. He was a very competent debater on biblical knowledge sources. He had many lectures and debates with missionaries from the University of Stellenbosch and other universities. And he held the fort as far as Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishat Islam was held for many years. His only opposition was now those clerics who had come under the influence of Deobandi and Wahhabi influences now, and had a very narrow-minded approach to the Ahmadiyya Lahore movement. Totally opposite to their ancestors, who had hailed so much lofty praises on the movement and Khaja Kamaluddin that came here. Then what happened was that in 1979, Dawood Saido passed away. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And what happened was, there was an elder who was very close to Dawood Saido. His name was Ismail Peck. He had learned a lot from Dawood Saido in terms of the biblical studies. He became almost proficient in what we would call hafiz in Arabic, on many biblical texts, in the sense that he could sit with equally eligible academics and professors in theology, in Christian theology, and debate with them. And they were amazed many a time that he could quote verses from the Bible without even opening the book. So again, he kept the fort after Dawood Saido in the same spirit that Khaja Kamaluddin had inspired us all to propagate Islam. But what happened was, we were mostly young men and women, besides Ismail Beg. In 1990, we had a visit from a senior Maulana from our Jamaat, who came here on a holiday from Holland. He was a friend of a very close associate of ours. He didn't come on a official visit, but he came to visit and wanted to meet with us. At the meeting he had with us, he inspired us and said he was very empathetic to us. He felt that we were battling on our own. We never had a center. We were struggling. And he said, look, what you should do, number one, change your name to Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishat Islam Lahore, South Africa, from Mediator Association, because nobody knows you and what your background is. We did that. And then the second thing he said was, try and motivate and mobilize yourselves to raise funds so that you can establish your own center and become independent. You don't have to work from people's houses, which is very awkward and inconvenient. When he left, we decided in a meeting that this is exactly what we should be doing. And then we decided, look, we can maybe accelerate the whole process if we register ourselves as a public benefits organization, and we can draw and obtain funds from the public as well. This led to us, according to legislation, municipal legislation, we had to make it known and publish our intentions in 2 newspapers, according to the law. We did that. And it so happened that the public now obviously has an opportunity to submit their objections. And we never had any objections except for one clerical body who decided that we had no right, for some reason or other, to establish an Islamic association because they said we were not Muslim. We challenged them on that and said, but what right have you got to tell us that? We are Muslims and we want to build an Islamic center. We're not building a casino or a nightclub or anything like that. But they objected anyway. The problem is that they did not just like normal, somebody would write back and object and say, these are the grounds of our objection. What they did was they went on a frenzy and used the pulpits to spread hatred against this organization that wants to build this Islamic center. Because they knew we were associated with Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who they regarded as an imposter, and you know all the other allegations that they make. So this thing that in South Africa at the time, it was at the time of political transition, and there was a lot of unrest taking place and protests were happening and people were running wild in the streets, etc. These clerics used the situation to further excite the emotions of the people against the movement, with all sorts of false allegations which made our lives very under stress and fear for our safety. They would, for example, take photographs of us and our families and put it on the walls of their mosques so that people can identify us. They established a committee, a rather sinister committee of 10, whose job it was to go out and witch hunt Ahmadis so that they can be publicly ostracized. Even our friends and neighbors, all of them, not just the members of the movement. So this is the situation. And they used to have political rallies in South Africa. You know, the ulama never really participated in the civil rights organizations as such that fought against apartheid. They just piggybacked on other organizations. But what they did was, at these rallies, they would hand out papers with our names on it so that people could sort of target us. And that made it even worse. We had many meetings to decide what really is the best way for us to handle this situation of stress. It was now becoming, because we had people coming to us and say our lives are in danger, we don't know. These people are going crazy, they're mad. And what happened was we decided the only way out for us was to seek relief from the courts. And this is what we did. In February, I think it was February 1982, we filed for an interdict to stop them and to assert our rights as Muslims and say that they must stop all this activity. They, in turn, obviously opposed the application, saying that we have to prove that we are Muslims before we can be given the freedom to build a center and all those kind of things. And then they demanded that we declare what our beliefs were, which we gave them, exactly as we've been taught by the Holy Prophet, Arkanul Iman, Arkanul Islam, exactly like that. They objected to it, to say that it wasn't sufficient. I will not go into this part of the detail. I think Dr. Zaid is most probably better to take us further on the various backwards and forwards. It was as if they did not know themselves what a Muslim was. They couldn't give us a clear definition of a Muslim. So how could they place themselves in a position to say we are not Muslim? And I think this is an incident that happened in India in the 1950s, where there was an inquiry, the Munir inquiry, where similar situation revealed a similar setup where these people did not know. Dr. Zaid was probably better to comment on that as well. But we were now in the situation where there was this backwards and forwards in the trial, and then what happened was we realized that the whole dispute was about Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad now and his claims. And we had to then get an expert witness to come to South Africa to deal with it. Somehow or other, we were told that there was one Hafiz Sher Muhammad, who was a missionary in Fiji at the time. And we did not know him that well in South Africa, except from articles that we read about him. And we obviously occasionally got the Light magazine where we saw his name mentioned. Other than that, we did not know him too well. But somehow or other, he got the message that which sort of explained to him our dilemma. And one night, our secretary called us and said to us, because we were facing all this backwards and forwards, that our definition of Islam or Muslim is not correct, the tenets that we gave them is not correct. And not that we were confused, we were convinced of the truth, but yet we were in a state of exasperation too. And then we get a telex. There were no faxes and emails in those days, but we received a telex from Maulana Hafiz Sher Muhammad, and the secretary of our Jamaat called us urgent to a meeting to his house. And said, hey, you people must better come here because I want to read you this. And the fax, or the telegram, was very brief and to the point. It merely says, these are the tenets of Islam. And exactly as it is, the 5 tenets was given to us by Maulana Hafiz Sher Muhammad, and he says that is nothing more, nothing less. Signed his name, Maulana Hafiz Sher Muhammad. It was an emotional event to us when the secretary read it out, because the very tenor and tone of that telegram told us that this was from someone who knew what he was talking about. And this is how our association with Maulana Hafiz Sher Muhammad now started. And then obviously things were arranged for him. I don't want to go into detail. I have given a tribute to Maulana Hafiz Sher Muhammad on another channel, which is the Lahore Ahmadiyya Islamic Society Symposium, where anyone who listens to this can go in there and get more details about the claims of Mirza Sahib and also the tribute that I gave to Hafiz Sher Muhammad. Suffice it to say, Sher Muhammad came to South Africa and he was welcomed, and he was really a person who became extremely popular at the time. We had first struggled because we couldn't understand the Urdu, but later, Dr. Zaid Aziz arrived and helped a lot with the translation. And
thank you.
Yes.
At this stage, may I now ask Dr. Zahid to probably give his take, as we have realized that you had no other choice but to seek redress from the courts. Dr. Zahid, the Jamaat in South Africa would have employed the services of an expert witness in the person of Maulana Hafiz Shah Muhammad. You would have assisted him greatly in the preparation of the arguments that he was to submit to the court. And I know that you would have participated in the proceedings in, in the capacity as a translator. Can you walk us through the litigation from the initial stages right up to the judgment and how it turned out, as well as telling us how the arguments would have been put forward to the court and how perhaps they were countered by the defendants in that matter?
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this discussion, and thank you to our brother Ibrahim Muhammad from Cape Town, who has given you the background to how the case originated. As preliminary, I would say we have to bear in mind that no court or human authority in the world can determine which person or which group is a Muslim in the sense in which Allah wants a person to be a Muslim, in the sense in which we want to be Muslims and we want to strive to be Muslims. In that sense, no court or authority in the world can declare that such and such a person is a Muslim. For example, it says in the Hadith that none of you has faith unless he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Now, no court in the world can determine that a person is loving his brother, loving for his brother what he loves for himself, and is therefore a Muslim in that sense. That is not the sense that we are talking about. This case, as you will have seen from Brother Ibrahim's contribution, was about the fact that our Jamaat was being defamed by allegations that we hold beliefs which are against Islam and which disqualify us from having rights of Muslims. And our Jamaat members were being labeled as apostates and as people who were falsely claiming to be Muslims. And therefore, it was what was under threat was the honor, the lives, the properties, and the rights of the members of our Jamaat in Cape Town. And it was for that that they went to court to prove that our Jamaat, by the grace of Allah, does meet all the requirements of Islam to be known as Muslims. So it wasn't that we were asking the court to declare that we were Muslims and that would confirm that we are true Muslims in the sight of Allah. So it was to safeguard our rights as citizens. For example, in the court case, it involved a cemetery which had been given by the King of England a long time ago for the burial of Muslims. That's what the deeds of the cemetery stated. So our opponents were preventing our members from being buried there, claiming that they are not Muslims. So from that point of view, we had to show that we were Muslims from the point of view of being entitled to be buried there. Now, someone who is buried there, it does not mean that he is a true practicing Muslim, but they are a member of the Muslim community. So that was what this issue was about. And the second point I would like to make, and in fact you heard it already, is that in whatever I say here, I'm speaking from my personal knowledge of and my personal association with this particular court case. And at its two key stages, I went to Cape Town to act as a translator and interpreter for Mullah Hafiz Sher Mohammad Saab, may Allah's mercy be on him. And I was in the courtroom in the final stages all the time in November 1985. I think I must make a slight correction to what Arif Rahman said regarding my role, that I was helping Hafiz Sher Mohammad Saab to frame the arguments. I wasn't. I was merely a student of his. And I might have given some advice here and there, but essentially, I was his translator and interpreter. Although I did provide a few English sources, writings of British scholars or Western scholars on Islam in English, which he would not have been aware of. So, as Brother Ibrahim has already said, what he was talking about are these pre-trial submissions. No court hearing as such had taken place. So, your side submits papers. The advocates of your side or the attorneys submit papers to court. Copies go to the other side about what case we are going to present, and the other side then file in court on paper what their replies are going to be, and then we reply to their reply. So these are all the pre-trial submissions before any trial takes place. So to our standpoint that we are Muslims because we believe in those 5 fundamentals of Islam, our opponents, the other party, was mainly the MJC, which stands for the Muslim Judicial Council of Cape Town or of South Africa. And despite their name, it might say Judicial Council in their name, but they are not any kind of a legal body. It's just an association of ulama. So they are the ones who were applying the pre-trial missions, that just accepting the fundamentals of Islam is not sufficient to make a person a Muslim. There are other beliefs necessary and these don't accept. And they gave a list of some, well, it was mainly 3 or 4 items which they said make these non-Muslims, even though they believe in the fundamentals of Islam. One was that they deny the finality of prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad. In that, they can't just say they deny the finality. In that, they accept as leader and reformer one Mirza Ghulam Ahmad who claimed to be a prophet, or they don't repudiate him. All these things make them deniers of finality of prophethood. Secondly, they don't believe that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was an apostate. Thirdly, they don't believe in the virgin birth of Jesus having been born without a father. And fourthly, they don't believe in, and I quote them here, jihad or religious war against unbelievers in Islam. So those were their reasons. So our side then asked them, give particulars of all such doctrines and principles which qualify a person as a Muslim. What are all of them? And their reply to this was, for the purposes of this case, you don't need to know what are all the beliefs required of a Muslim. All you need to know for this case is that your beliefs disqualify you to be Muslims. So either they didn't want to, or they were unable to define who is a Muslim. But as they say, they can define who is not a Muslim. So then later on, they changed their submission. Also, another thing which happened at this point was that on our side, there were 2 parties suing them. One was the Anjuman, the association which they had formed, and the other one was the individual, Mr. Ismail Peck, may Allah's mercy be on him. And through some legal technicality, the MJC succeeded in disqualifying the Anjuman as a party in the case, because they said that an Anjuman is an association. You can't defame an association. And since Mr. Ismail Peck's name was there as the second plaintiff, so the case therefore continued with him as the plaintiff. And then in December 1983, the MJC submitted to court a special plea. Earlier, they had been saying, and these are non-Muslims, we can prove them to be non-Muslims because they hold these un-Islamic beliefs. But suddenly they filed a special plea in which they said, these religious and doctrinal issues are purely ecclesiastical in nature, and it is not appropriate for a secular court to attempt to resolve these questions. Number two, these issues have been settled in our favor by various international Islamic bodies, and therefore the court should not attempt to resolve these matters about who is a Muslim, but should accept and apply the decisions of these bodies. So they said that the court cannot hear religious arguments from the Quran and Hadith and Islamic history and views of Islamic theologians about who is a Muslim, because it's not appropriate for a secular court, and these matters have already been decided by our ulama, so the court should simply accept the verdict of our ulama. But unfortunately for them, they thought of this too late, because the special plea, they had a time limit with which to file some special plea, and they were too late for it. So they had to explain why they were too late. And they explained that previously it was not appreciated just how complex and difficult the doctrinal issues in the case were. This only became apparent when a detailed consultation was recently had by me, that's to say their attorney, with certain international experts. The trial on the issues arising will involve many weeks of extremely complex expert testimony. But if you hear our special plea, then it will be unnecessary to have all this complex evidence, and time and money will be saved. So they themselves say, you see, it was not appreciated previously. Earlier, they had thought it would be so easy to prove that Ahmadis were non-Muslims. This is called being a victim of your own propaganda. Their propaganda was that Ahmadis have such distorted and wrong beliefs that it would be so easy, even an ordinary Muslim could prove Ahmadis to be non-Muslims. But when they went into it further, this is what they mean, how complex and difficult these issues are. So they made this special plea for the court that it should accept just the fatwas of their ulama. And now, unfortunately for them, the judge did not accept these reasons. In judging on this point, the judge said, in any event, the defendants, that's to say the MJC, in order to be able to plead the case, must have known and appreciated what the issues were that are involved in this case and what their answers were to the case put forward by Ahmadis. And so, and the court goes on to say that when we look at their previous pleadings in those papers that I've been mentioning, that it makes it quite clear that previously they had the intention of putting forward religious arguments to prove Ahmadis to be non-Muslims. Anyhow, so we are now moving to 1984, and the MJC then filed documents in court to indicate that they would be fighting the case on a religious basis. And they gave a list of something like 11 or 12 experts who would appear on their behalf. And 6 of them were extremely well-known personalities in Pakistan, ulama and legal experts, such as Maulana Zafar Ahmad Ansari, Justice retired Muhammad Afzal Chima, Maulana Justice Muhammad Taqi Usmani, Professor Khurshid Ahmed, Dr. Sayyid Riyazul Hasan Gilani, Professor Mahmood Ahmed Ghazi, and then in their submissions, they've given the qualifications of these people as to what high positions they hold in Pakistan, such as members of the Constitution Commission and judges of the Federal Shariat Court, etc. And who were our expert witnesses? Mainly, it was Hafiz Sher Mohammad Sahab, one person who didn't know much English, and he'd never appeared in a court, even as a witness or in any capacity, while against him were going to be these eminent judges and ulama from Pakistan. So that was the situation in 1984. So the trial was then set for November 1984. And this is where this was the first time I went to Cape Town, and we met our advocates. We used to meet them every day. We were going to plead our case. And Hafiz Saab used to brief them on our arguments. And you see, your advocates in those briefings, they put counter arguments to you, which your opponents are going to put forward, and see what answers you give. But anyhow, so Hafiz Saab's evidence or documents which he was going to present on various issues, most of them, almost all of them, except one, were translated by me into English. One had already been done by the late Chaudhry Masood Akhtar from USA. So when the trial opened in November 1984, immediately the defendants raised certain special questions. You can do this under some legal procedure. They said that the court must first consider certain preliminary questions which must be determined first, separately from the merits of the case. And what those points were, well, it's really one point under different headings: whether or not the court should decline to hear the merits of the dispute as to whether Ahmadis are Muslims or not. And their argument was a secular court could not adjudicate on religious issues. It must accept the decisions of the MJC and the international Islamic religious bodies. So they put that to court, that before it can hear the case itself, it should settle these questions. So that November 1984 hearing only lasted 3 days, and the judge reserved his judgment on this point. And you can see how desperate the MJC and their ulama were to prevent the question whether Ahmadis are Muslims or not, according to Islam, according to the Holy Quran, according to Hadith. They wanted to prevent this question from being discussed in court by saying, we've decided it already, the court is not competent to rule on this case. Now, a few months later, in July 1985, the judge came back with his ruling on their preliminary questions, and he rejected them. He rejected their plea. He wrote, "Our courts in South Africa have never lacked the courage to deal with doctrinal disputes." In other words, hearing religious arguments, where this has been necessary. He went on to write, "Indeed, it appears to me that the resolution of the question whether Ahmadis are Muslims or not may well be more fairly and dispassionately decided by a secular court such as this than by some other tribunal composed of theologians." So, and he went on to say that because of the volume of evidence, this court may well be the most suitable forum to deal with those experts and with their evidence. So, since he turned down their plea, it meant that the hearings were now going to go ahead. And the date was set Tuesday, the 5th of November, 1985. In 1985, obviously, 5th of November was on a Tuesday, not like this year. So while Hafiz Sahib used to spend obviously several months in South Africa at a time, he had gone back, I think, after 1984 and returned. In 1984, I was there for just over 3 weeks. And so I went back in October 1985 for about 3 or 4 weeks. And again, we met our advocates to finalize the case. And the MJC had obviously, it is clear, stated that they would fight the case in court. So in October, we finalized our presentation, what Hafiz Sahib would present as an expert witness in court. And of course, the advocates also had to look at Mr. Peck himself, because he was claiming that he was being deprived of his rights by the ulama. The ulama, or the MJC, had been instigating Muslims to deprive him of his rights. And so the advocates had to put forward his case as an individual as well. Anyhow, so Hafiz Sahib had prepared expert testimony on a wide range of vital topics, such as the definition of a Muslim according to Quran and Hadith, then the beliefs of Ahmadis which show them to be Muslims and to satisfy those requirements of who is a Muslim. Then what are the claims of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib? The fact that he affirmed belief in the finality of prophethood and denied claiming to be a prophet, and explained the use of certain terms in his writings about his status. And then a lot of the evidence covered the replies to allegations against him, which included that he claims to be a prophet, or that he's denied jihad, or relating to the birth of Jesus, etc. Or they also raised another point, that he in his writings has insulted Jesus. This was, as I think we discovered in the second case, this was to incite the Christians, the court officials, generally judges, advocates were generally Christians, some of them were Jewish. And this was to incite them against Ahmadis by saying that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad has also, not only has he said things against Islam, but he has also insulted Jesus. And this is where, if I may use an analogy, in the Holy Prophet's lifetime, during his mission in Mecca, where did Muslims go when persecuted to seek refuge? They went to Africa. And what happened then? The Quraysh sent a delegation. They sought refuge in Africa, in a Christian country. And so the Quraysh sent a delegation after them to plead to the Christian king that these people insult Jesus, because they say he's not God, he's not Son of God. And they, as you know, the leader of the Muslims in that country, Abyssinia, then read out before the king what Islamic beliefs are about Jesus. And the king, while being Christian, said, well, Jesus wasn't any more than this. So the same thing happened here. And these sought shelter in Africa, in South Africa in this case. And the ulama sent people after them. And they sought shelter in the Christian country, which is South Africa and Africa. They sent people after them to plead to the Christians of that country, to the Christian authorities, that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad insults Jesus also. But just as they failed in Abyssinia and the Holy Prophet's time, they failed here as well. So anyhow, you see, to present his case in court, which consisted of a huge number of references and quotations, not only quotations from Hazrat Mirza Sahib's books, but from not only Quran and Hadith, but a large number of Muslim theologians and scholars throughout history. And to present them in court, you actually can be asked to show the original. And somehow or other, Hafiz Sher Muhammad Sahib managed to get transported a huge library of his books to Cape Town under the circumstances when MVs found it almost impossible to send out any literature from Pakistan. But he got it from Pakistan, of his not only his books, but other related books that he needed. And so the trial opened on the 5th of November 1985, and we got there all prepared to present our case. And so this is what I saw. A very large courtroom with an upper gallery was packed with members of the Muslim public. And apart from maybe 10 people, all the other hundreds were supporters of the ulama. And they'd been instructed to attend. Then the proceedings opened. And our advocate whispered into my ear, there is going to be a shock announcement, and I want you to tell Hafiz about it, because I was conveying the proceedings to him in Urdu. Obviously, the advocates inform each other and the judge before declaring something in public. So the judge came, and the other side's attorney stood up. And not the advocate stood up. In fact, it was their junior advocate. There's a senior advocate and junior advocate. And the senior advocate was someone famous by the name of Ismail Muhammad. But for reasons which you will probably understand, he didn't turn up on the final hearing. He sent his junior to do what I am now going to relate to you. Their attorney, or as the junior counsel, stood up and said that his clients could not accept the jurisdiction of this honorable court to determine who is a Muslim. They had canvassed the opinions of the international Muslim community on this point. I'm quoting some of these from the actual court transcripts. He said they had found the common point of view throughout the Islamic world that Muslims cannot accept a determination from a non-Muslim judge as to who is a Muslim. He said that the defendant has received messages from organizations, Muslim organizations throughout the world, representing hundreds of millions of Muslims, expressing this view that a court, a non-Muslim or a secular court, cannot determine who is a Muslim. And I remember he had with him some sort of bundle of telegrams and messages, and he would throw one like this in front of him and say, 5 million Muslims of Canada say we agree with you. 2 million Muslims of UK say we agree with you, and so on. So he was counting these millions. What they had done was to get one association from each country to send them a message saying, we agree that a secular court can't decide who is a Muslim. And that became the opinion of so many millions of Muslims. So the counsel for the defense then announced that the defendants wish no longer to participate in these proceedings, and they withdraw their defense in this matter. And then the defendants, their legal representatives, and all those hundreds of supporters walked out of the courtroom shouting Allahu Akbar, and they never returned. These supporters were only there for the purpose of staging this walkout and showing their strength of numbers. And for the rest of the trial, which I'll go through in a moment briefly. The local religious leaders had given strict instructions to their followers not to attend the proceedings. Otherwise, they themselves would get declared kafir. But of course, they still wanted to know what was going on in the proceedings. So they sent a gentleman. I remember he used to wear a blue suit. And his name was Fawad. I don't know whether Ibrahim can look him up, but he was young. So by the grace of Allah, he may still be alive. And he used to report back to the ulama what had happened. And our legal counsel and the judge told us that even though they withdrawn from the case, as long as the case is being heard, they have the right still to turn up and say that they've changed their minds. But anyhow, if defendants withdraw from any case, then the people who've taken them to court win it. They win it by default. But so we didn't then need to present our case because the opponents weren't there. We didn't need to answer their.
Why then would you have continued to present the evidence in such a circumstance?
Well, two reasons. One, we had spent so much time and energy in preparing it. Secondly, we wanted to be in the record so that it would be a part of the court record and the judge would be mentioning it in his judgment. And the judge did say that although if the defendants withdraw, then the plaintiffs win, technically, but not necessarily. He said the judge still has to assess, in the absence of the defendants, whether what the plaintiffs are claiming is actually plausible or not. Because someone could be making a completely implausible claim. I could claim that I designed all those rockets for NASA, which took the Americans to the moon. And if NASA don't turn up for some reason to defend that we're not defending it, it doesn't mean that I win the judgment, that I designed all those rockets. The judge still has to assess the claim that it's reasonable to allow it. But anyhow, we presented our case fully, and this lasted just over 5 minutes.
I just wanted to add something there, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
It also gave the public the opportunity to come and listen to what was presented from the writings of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. They always claim they've been left in the dark, they don't know, and all these things. So this was a public forum. It was open to everyone. Anyone could walk in and sit there. And that is also, I think, maybe one of the reasons why Hafiz Sahib maybe also decided that it's best that he just give it the evidence and people can come and listen. They can form their own opinion afterwards, but they had the opportunity.
It all appeared in the papers at the time. I don't know whether withdrawal in case over MV sect, it says here, from a newspaper in South Africa. That was, of course, the day after they withdrew. When the case was actually settled, then that again was covered in the South African newspapers. So the judge, first of all, asked Hafiz Saab some general questions. I think he was trying to assess his knowledge. And so I translated the questions and I translated Hafiz Saab's answers back. The judge asked, tell me about Islam and the Prophet Muhammad. And I could see that as Hafiz Saab went through his answer, the judge became more and more impressed with him straight away. Then after that, we went through all those 21 topics that we prepared the evidence on. Our advocate would introduce the topic And then Hafiz Sahib would start reading he had it in Urdu, in his original Urdu. And he would stop after each quotation and I would read it out. I was standing next to him, just outside the witness box, and I would read it from the English documents. And then Hafiz Sahib was there for 5.5 days. And then after that, there was one more day when Mr. Ismail Peck went on the stand to say how he had suffered, because he was seeking redress for his suffering at the hands of the MJC. And then summarized the whole case, which took quite some time. And then the judgment was reserved, and it was given the following week on Wednesday, the 20th of November, 1985. That's when the judgment came out by Judge Mr. D.M. Williamson. And I'd like to just read out his impression of Hafiz Sher Mohammad Sahib in that judgment, which is in English. Second plaintiff placed before this court the evidence of one Hafiz Sher Mohammad, an Ahmadi theologian and missionary, and a scholar and a person learned in matters concerning the Muslim faith and religious practices. I am satisfied that he is an expert in this field and able to speak with authority on it. Then later on, he says this about Hafiz Sher Mohammad Sahib. In my estimation, the witness is a man of great learning and integrity. He gave evidence before me for some 6 days and created an extremely favorable impression. I accept his evidence without hesitation. And our advocates also said that the judge had said that Hafiz Sher Mohammad Sahib was the best witness who would ever appear before him in court. And so the judge gave the judgment. A part of we were seeking certain court orders that the plaintiff was declared Muslim, and that to publish against Ahmadis that they are kafir and non-Muslim is defamatory, and they can't be stopped from entering a certain mosque and buried in a certain cemetery that I mentioned earlier. So in the first of his orders, I only read that. There were 3 defendants, the MJC and the trustees of a certain mosque and the trustees of that cemetery. As against all 3 defendants, second plaintiff is declared to be a Muslim and as such to be entitled to all such rights and privileges as pertain to Muslims. And of course, the judge read out his judgment. He read out the whole of it. And we were there waiting right to the end when he reached this sentence. And so many of our friends then thanked Allah at that point. And later on, I found a revelation of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib in his first book, Ahmadiyya, and he's applied it to some court case, with a property court case in his time. But the revelation he had about that court case is just 5 words in Urdu. Degree ho gayi hai, Musalman hai. That translates to, degree is the English word degree. It's actually decree, and they use it for judgment. So his revelation consists of only the words, the judgment has been given, he is a Muslim. Now, Hazrat Mirza Sahib applied to an event in his time about some property dispute, some case his father took to court. And Hazrat Mirza Sahib had prophesied that he would win. But the reports came that they had lost. So Hazrat Mirza Sahib said, I was very embarrassed. And I prayed to Allah, and I had this revelation, judgment has come. Musalman hai. he says this revelation means that the judgment has been given in our favor, and Allah is saying to me, what kind of a Muslim are you that you have doubted my word? That he takes Musalman hai to mean, are you a Muslim? Musalman hai. But if you take the words themselves, we heard them. Brother Ibrahim might have been there. We heard them in court. Second plaintiff is declared to be a Muslim. In the event I issue the following orders, second plaintiff is declared to be a Muslim. And Hazrat Mirza Sahib wrote, degree ho gayi, Musalman hai. And that was written in a book published in 1884. So 100 years later, the prophecy of the promised Messiah, the revelation of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib was fulfilled. And it couldn't have been that with such an important court case, there was nothing that had been intimated to the great reformer of our age. So I'll end there then. This, and just to say that this was what we later called the first case, the Ahmadiyya case. And after it finished, the judgment was issued. And it even got printed in a legal journal in Pakistan called Supreme Court Reports, because they published judgments of interest from other countries as well. And we have a photocopy of that, because after the judgment was published, the magazine was withdrawn by the government. It's an official journal. It was withdrawn. And those great Pakistani witnesses whose names I mentioned, in 1984, we did used to hear that they were there. But in 1985, of course, they had been told that the defense was going to withdraw, so they weren't there. And we used to ask ourselves, we haven't heard of them coming. After the judgment was given and it appeared in Pakistani newspapers, they issued statements saying that Qadianis have won a judgment in the Jewish court of the apartheid state of South Africa. And this shows the close link between Qadianis and the state of Israel. And also that the judgment was given just listening to one-sided evidence of a Qadiani called Sher Muhammad. So they didn't seem to indicate that it was one-sided because they chose not to be there. Now, they've said Jewish court, they said that because the judge previously who turned down their plea when they said the court shouldn't, secular court cannot decide, rule on religious matter, particularly in Islamic matter. That judge, Berman, was actually a Jew. But when the case actually started in that November, he was changed and the Catholic Mr. D.M. Williamson was appointed judge. So these people's statement, even if the judge had been a Jew, it would have been ridiculously wrong. But he wasn't. And they tried to then associate the judgment as coming from a country which is in disrepute because of the system then prevailing of apartheid. And these reports appeared in the famous Urdu Pakistani newspaper, the Daily Jang, in its Lahore and London editions. So I wrote them a letter in Urdu saying that I was there, I know the facts, and what they're saying is quite false. And the Jang did not publish my correction. So I took the matter further. And in the United Kingdom, you can complain to a regulatory body if you have a complaint against a newspaper or a media outlet. It used to be called the Press Council in those days. It's called something else now. So I sent them a complaint with translations of what had appeared in the Jung, and they passed them to the editor of the Jung for reply. And suddenly then, and they said that they would then make it into an official complaint to be put before their panel. And suddenly realizing this, the Jung quickly published my letter, although they edited it. They published my letter. And they said, replied to the press council that we published his letter. But that's after hearing from the press council. And under my letter, they put their own explanation that we didn't print his letter first because there'd been a lot of controversy and we wanted to bring the argument to an end. But there wasn't any arguments to and fro which was going on, which they brought to an end. So, but that wouldn't have been possible in the editions of the Jung in Pakistan. But because it was their edition in the UK, subject to
just to be clear,
so that's the end.
Essentially, after the judgment, you also have to fight the case again in order to get the proper, the actual outcome of the matter properly reported by the press.
Yes, and in those days then, in fact, in 1986, the year after, I was able to compile this book, The Ahmadiyya Case. I'm the translator and compiler, and it says in it, chief contributor, Maulana Hafiz Sher Mohammed. This book has been out of print for quite some time, and recently I've been revising it, and inshallah it may be published at least electronically soon. This time I'm intending to add photos in it as well.
Inshallah.
So, but this matter goes on and on, because I just need to say quickly that after all this ended, I think what the MJC in South Africa faced was objections by their own followers who said, you collected all this money from us to fight this case, then you withdrew. If you'd at least fought, if you'd at least appeared, only then you would have had any chance of winning. But by withdrawing, you lost all that while appealing to us for all this money. So they then looked out for a chance when they could appear. And in this next case, which was where the plaintiff was a Sunni imam who regarded Ahmadis as Muslims, he took out a case. He was dismissed by the MJC from his position as imam, or they did things to have him dismissed. And so he filed a case against them, the MJC. And this time the MJC decided to answer the religious arguments. You see, his argument was that I believe I'm justified in considering Ahmadis as Muslims. They say they are non-Muslim and I'm wrong in allowing them to come into my mosque. So obviously the issue then in that case also became, is he right in considering Ahmadis to be Muslims? And in this case, the judge did comment that the MJC seemed to have done an about turn on their standpoint in the last case only 2 years ago, when they said a secular court could hear these arguments. And now here they are presenting them. But we can't go into really that case because it's too prolonged. It's not really directly connected with the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement.
If we can pause here, I just wanted to ask Imam Ibrahim, if he can comment on the impact of that judgment and the legacy that it would have left on the Jamaat in South Africa.
The judgment, as far as our livelihoods are concerned, was more of a moral victory, because the MJC immediately afterwards said they will not give obedience to the judgment, and in fact they defy the judgment in itself, and would just order all their followers to treat us the same as we were treated before. This is a type of characters, this type of people are. They don't even, respect the rule of law. But anyway, look, to us it was a great moral victory. And as Brother Zahid has pointed out, as the trial went through, it was not in any essence a personal victory to us. This is not really, we wanted to reassert our rights as having the civil rights as Muslims. That is what we achieved. And now we have that in our favor. But more than that was the fact that of this moral victory that we attained as well. Because many people start thinking, oh, we belong to the Ahmadiyya movement. Maybe there is something wrong with the movement or anything like that. Sometimes you have to re-inspire people. So on that sense, we became very much more emboldened and inspired by what the Ahmadiyya case eventually, the outcome of the case. Also, the fact that they have the evidence, which we must thank Brother Aziz for compiling it in that book. We have access to the arguments, and anytime an argument comes up, we can, refer to the book ready at hand. And it's such a treasure of knowledge itself. It goes into the definition of jihad, which in these days are so much come up as a topic and being abused. And here we have the evidence in front of us. And in the world that we live in, we have this takfiri going on all the time. Muslims themselves are still not very clear on how to define a Muslim. And here we have this evidence, and I've heard so many of my friends say, hey, thank you for this, man. Because I can argue with the imams in the mosque when they bring up this takfiri thing. And it's far-reaching. It is never-ending. Be highly grateful for, even though they insist that they don't want to give us our rights, although there's not it was in those days when the case was on. So alhamdulillah, we thank Almighty Allah, we thank everyone.
Thank you very much, Imam Ibrahim. Dr. Zahid, if you would like to give the final word on this topic, on this subject.
Well, all I can say is that it's not any human effort which brings about such results, but the assistance and support of Allah. And His support depends on how we adhere to His teachings and do what He has asked, which has been stressed on us by the Mujaddid of the sages, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib, and his great disciple Maulana Muhammad Ali, that we continue to present the message of Islam in the world. We continue to follow that message in our own lives. And we pray that, you see, this evidence is not just for proving us to be Muslims, but rather that if it's it has broader implications, good implications for the Muslim world, that various Muslim groups then can cease condemning each other as kafir and murtad, unbelievers and apostate, and they can still have all their differences, but follow the teachings of the Holy Prophet, and on matters of common interest to Islam and Muslims, they can then act together as a great force. But that is only possible if the reforms which have been carried out by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib, reforms in bringing back the true teachings of Islam into the world as brought into the world by the Holy Quran, the Holy Prophet Muhammad. It can only be done if people follow those rather than blindly obeying their religious leaders. So we've gone on for quite a long time, and I don't know if it's been easy on our hearers. But anyhow, there was quite a lot of information to convey. And in the end, as Brother Ibrahim said, we thank Almighty Allah that while being such weak and in fact undeserving persons, that He granted us His aid and assistance purely because of His great mercy and not because of any achievement on our part. So, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you. Let me just quote one of the comments of one of our viewers who states, "All who recite Kalima are Muslims, Alhamdulillah." Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Zakir Aziz and Mr. Ibrahim Mohammed, for recounting the events of that case so many years ago. May the members of this Jamaat continue to uphold the truth in every forum. Please, thank you also to our viewers for lending your ear. We went over to the time a little bit, but we are grateful for your participation. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more enlightening discussions on various aspects of Islam. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you.
Alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much.